The Israel-Palestine conflict is a major cultural and political issue in the 21st century. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a political conflict over land and power in the Arabian Peninsula. The conflict started back in the 19th century, as Zionism started gaining influence in Europe. The Jewish people began to unite and move back to what was then Palestine to form a state of their own. However, World War II put Zionism at the top of the political agenda for many countries. The Holocaust and the suffering it created for the Jews sparked a massive international migration from Europe to British-controlled Palestine. However, the Jewish-Israeli residents didn't exactly get along with the Palestinians. Each group saw the others as a natural enemy. The Israelis saw the Palestinians as people occupying their God-given land, while the Palestinians saw the Israelis as Western invaders pushing them out of their land. Eventually, the British stepped in, and the United Nations, a supranational organization dedicated to solving international issues, resolved to split the country in two. Israel as the blue, and Palestine as the orange, creating a superimposed boundary between the new states. However, only the Jews were happy with this resolution. As Zionism had spread nearly a century earlier, the Jews had long been trying to reclaim their land, and the Palestinians saw the recent U.S. resolution as an extension of the Jewish push into their land. War broke out among the nations, and other Arab states such as Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria declared war on Israel as well. This was brutal conflict, but the Israelis had Western military resources on their side and won. This ended with Israel existing as a state, but not Palestine. By definition, a state is a political entity that meets particular requirements. A state has sovereignty and territorial integrity, the ability to militarily and politically control their territory, defined borders, public services such as a police force, an economic system with currency and commerce, social engineering such as education, and is recognized by other states, among other things. Israel post-war met all this criteria, but not Palestine. This meant that 700,000 Palestinian civilians made refugees from the war, someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence, now had no state of their own. At this point, Palestine is not considered a state, but a stateless nation. A nation is a group of people who see themselves as one based on shared ancestry and culture, and is culturally defined rather than defined by land. A stateless nation is such a group of people who have no qualified state to call their own. This created an enormous refugee crisis not resolved today. This is called the Nakba by Arabs, Arabic for catastrophe. Today, there are more than 7 million internally displaced persons, IDPs, within Israel. They are displaced from their homes and land, but have not yet migrated out of the country. Palestinians, though technically recognized as equal within Israel, are often victims of severe discrimination. They have a harder time acquiring property, using public services, and in some cases are separated in public facilities. For decades, the United States has firmly stood by Israel and supported them through each military conflict. This is largely because of the incidences in the Second World War, as well as Israel being somewhat of a buffer state under domino theory in the shattered belt of the Middle East and European states, remaining a strong sphere of influence surrounded by Soviet-controlled and influenced countries during the Cold War. As such, we currently support Jewish settlements and oppose Palestinian statehood, which is highly controversial in the international community. After the two wars, one between Israel and Palestine and one between Israel and the other Arab states nearby, Israel controlled a large amount of the Middle East, such as the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Sinai Territory. However, the United Nations passed Resolution 242, which limited Israel's territory to that which they controlled before the war. Since the war, Jews have been creating internationally illegal settlements along the West Bank, and continue expanding today. This is significant for several reasons. It splits and isolates Palestinian communities, removes some Palestinians from their land, and makes it much harder to ever establish a future Palestinian state. There have always been forces that seek to unify the Palestinian people and push for sovereignty, such as Fatah, but their effectiveness has been hindered by the religious extremist actions of militant groups such as the PLO and Hamas, who carry out guerrilla warfare and attack Israeli citizens regardless of ethnicity. The issue with each of these groups is that they are all in a bit of moral gray area. Hamas may have organized the first suicide bombing of Israeli citizens, but is better known for establishing Palestinian infrastructure known as clinics and schools. There have been two uprisings by the Palestinian people to reclaim statehood, known as the Intifadas. The first Intifada was launched in the late 1900s as a peaceful protest of Palestinians boycotting Israeli goods and refusing to pay Israeli taxes. But when the Israeli government responded with violence, it became a violent conflict. Eventually, peace was nearly reached, particularly in part to the United States and the Clinton administration, but eventually Clinton's deal fell flat and the Second Intifada began soon after, when an Israeli leader named Ariel Sharon led thousands of troops to Jerusalem, a sacred site in both Judaism and Islam, and incited the conflict. After this, the Israelis constructed a wall around the West Bank as a consequent boundary to protect against terror attacks, though it has sparked a locational boundary dispute as the wall extends several miles past the allocated territory of Israel per the United Nations resolution. As such, the Palestinians see it as an illegal land encroachment because it claims territory several miles past the border. Today, Palestinian citizens are still part of a stateless nation and have few rights in the eyes of Israelis and the United States. The Palestinian Authorities and Hamas continually trade blows, with rocket attacks by Hamas followed by consequent military occupations in Palestine, in which citizens and militants alike are killed. This conflict is one of the most difficult to solve today because, like the parties involved, it represents a gray area in policy and morality. The Jewish people throughout history have been repeatedly threatened, harmed, and killed throughout intolerant parts of the world, and nowhere has this better been seen than the Holocaust. For this reason, the Jewish people certainly need a national homeland, and one has been promised to them by the UN. However, the Jewish state has been consistently disparaging and ruthless towards Palestinians, evicting them from their homes illegally, responding to peaceful protests with violence, and not allowing them basic rights within or without their country. Most experts believe the solution can be solved in one of two ways, either a one-state or two-state solution. The one-state solution would either establish a unified, democratic state in which Palestinians would make up the majority of the population, ending the legacy of a Jewish state, or a Jewish state in which Palestinians are forced out or denied the right to vote, a solution rejected by most Jews worldwide. The two-state solution ends with two sovereign states with independent rights and return rights for Palestinian refugees. Most polling across the world shows that the two-state solution is most favorable. The only thing we can do now is wait for the political climate to become less polarized, to help initiate peace talks, and hope that Israel and its Zionist leaders understand that just because cruelty has been inflicted upon them doesn't mean that they can inflict it on even more.